Hello everyone, welcome back to the course. So this presentation is regarding the types of operating system, the computer system, organization, along with the tasks or the major tasks performed by the operating system, including interrupts, etc. This is Archana Priyadashini, Assistant Professor in the Department of ISC, Canara Engineering College. So in the computer startup, the operating systems uh, they are designed to run on a class of machines, right? So system they must be configured for each specific computer. So this kind of program, the startup program, is it's actually called as a bootstrap program. So they will be stored in ROM. So for permanent uh, memory. So what is this booting? Booting is the process of loading the operating system into the main memory. So operating system in the sense there are a set of programs that will be loaded into the main memory to start in order for the computer to start running. So it basically is to have an initial program to load and execute the boot program, so which in turn which will load the operating system. So during the startup we will be having certain configurations that we need to set up, and that is nothing but your booting process, or the bootstrap program is being in execution in the background. So once this is done, it loads onto the operating system, and wherein you get the GUI. So during this bootstrapping, what happens is the kernel will be loaded into the memory, and they begin to execute. And there will be various tasks which will be performed, and the system will be made available to the users. So we can say that bootstrap programming will be typically stored in ROM, and once the computer starts up automatically, it reads the bootstrap program. So the boot program will be generally stored on the disk in the boot sector. So and this kind of boot program which loads the operating system into the memory is called as bootstrapping. So what does this do is it initializes all the aspects of the system. So in the next slide you will be seeing the different types of operating system. So in the previous slide, you have looked into the concept of bootstrapping. That is the program that begins once you boot up the operating system kernel. And there are different values for this bootstrap program. There are various values that will be initialized upon booting. So coming to the kinds of the operating system, first of all, we'll have the basic kind of operating system which does the batch processing. So in this batch processing, it's a collection of jobs. Actually, batch is nothing but a collection of jobs, and it is a sequential kind of jobs which will be given to the OS for processing. So we can define job as it consists of commands. That is the control program. What we can say, then the input and program. So here, since there's no interaction between the user and the operating system, just all the jobs are defined in terms of input and control system, and then the set of programs. Like for example, what has to be the input for the particular program, what should be the control flow for this program, all these are given directly in the job. So jobs with the similar needs will be batched together in order to speed up the processing. So all these jobs, okay, the jobs will be fed by the card readers or as well as tape drives, and which will be given to the operating systems for processing. So there will be several batches or several jobs of within a particular batch, and these we call it as a batch where we group similar kind of jobs. Similar kind of jobs will be one particular batch, another similar kind of job will be another batch. So one set of batch is given to the operating system, and only after this particular batch completes, the next batch is going to execute. Meanwhile, there is no user interaction between the operating system. The operator just fed these jobs in terms of punch cards to the operating system. And the main function that we can say in this batch system is to service the jobs in a batch one by one without requiring any intervention. So next kind of OS is multi-programming. So what is this multi-programming is? There will be multiple programs to run. Multiple programs to run. In a sense, if there is a single CPU, there is a single CPU, that CPU is kept busy somehow by swapping a particular process. So let's say there are three processes, P1, P2 and P3, and if P1 is taking long time in the CPU and P2 requires less time, but yet P2 has to wait, right, until P1 completes. Since because process P1 is there in the CPU and it's taking long time, and once the P1 exits the CPU and goes for IO, then the next process P2 can come into the execution mode. In this way, the CPU is kept busy. As it's comparatively, there is more advantage when comparing to batch process system, wherein CPU will remain idle until and unless the particular batch has completed. So, but here there can be switch over between the jobs. So let's say the job that is process P1 is there in the doing executing IO. So meanwhile, another process P2, next process P2 can come and take over the CPU. So that is more than one program can be loaded for execution. That is one program at a time, but they can switch over the jobs. So in this way, we can increase the CPU utilization. So multi-programming operating system, it actually divides the area to store multiple programs. So what memory layout it has got, that will be divided so that it can encompass it more programs, and there must be appropriate resource management for those programs. So next kind of operating system that needs to be considered is the multitasking. So when before we move on to the multitasking, what is the advantage of multi-programming? So obviously we know that CPU utilization is high and it increases the degree of multi-programming, right? What could be the possible drawbacks? We know that since the more than one program can come and make the CPU busy, this kind of CPU scheduling is required and memory management is required in this process. So next is about multitasking. So in this multitasking, it is the process of performing multiple tasks at the same time. So how do you perform multiple tasks at the same time? You just give computer more than one program at a time. Multitasking means computer can work with more than one program at a time. For example, a user may be busy working on the Microsoft Word. Simultaneously, he may switch on to games and he may perform certain calculations. All these are simultaneous tasks or multitasking approach. So how is this possible? So multitasking is a logical extension of multi-programming. As you know, here more than one program can execute. Okay, as that is, we are making the CPU busy, but at a time only one. In case of multi-programming, but multitasking in the sense it gives certain time slot. Okay, certain time slot, or you can say multi-programming with round robin. So one kind of approach. So multitasking here, it gives a certain time slot for each process. So even though a particular process has got a larger time burst, it has to execute only for that particular time slot, and then it can execute the remaining task later by being in the ready queue. So this is how they can switch. Each process gets a equal time slot, or you can say this as a fair share. So this supports concurrent execution. So next is about the multiprocessing. Multiprocessing. What is this multiprocessing? As you know, by the word, it means there will be more than one processor in the particular system. More than one processor means many jobs or multiple jobs can be run parallel together. Like previously, if we had got a particular CPU or single CPU, only one job, right? Only one job can be executed at a time. But here, if there are four CPUs, let's imagine four processes can run simultaneously. Okay, four processes can run simultaneously. That is the concept of multiprocessing. So multiprocessor system means that more than one processor, they can share the same bus, clock, memory, and peripheral devices. So there it's also called as a parallel system or tightly coupled system. Again, we can discuss some of the features of this multiprocess system. That is, it should support efficient context switching. So the context switching is so fast that you'll not be able to identify whether whether OS is dedicated to your system or OS is dedicated to somebody else. So such kind of as context switching happens, a very fast context switching process. So this kind of multiprocess system should also support large physical address space and large virtual address space. So apart from the physical memory, it is also called as a virtual memory. We'll look into it later. So if there's one more feature, that is, here since there are multiple processors, so if one processor fails, then other processors should retrieve that interrupted process state. So the concept of failure is very less when compared to multiprocessing system, and it can be used in different ways. That is, the multiprocessors can be used as uniprocessors, or it can be used as within a single system to execute multiple independent tasks, and so on. So let's discuss the advantages of multiprocessor system. So basically here we have got throughput, cost, reliability, response time. And next, coming to the real time OS. So let's see about computer system organization. First of all, let's discuss its operation. Computer system consists of hardware devices and the software which provides control to the user for solving many problems. As you know, computer system consists of CPU, memory, I/O devices, and it consists of one or more modules of each type. All these components will be interconnected, and there is a common bus which is used for communication between these devices. So each device will have its own controller. So main structural elements of this computer system will consist of CPU, main memory, I/O modules, so along with the system bus. So in central processing unit, it is the CPU which controls the operation of the computer, and as you know, it performs data processing function. Coming to the main memory. So in main memory, it is basically used for storing programs and data, and this memory is typically volatile. And it is also called as primary memory or real memory. Coming to the I/O modules, which is the third structural element of computer system. These modules, they are basically used for moving data between the computer and the external environment. As you know, external environment consists of a variety of devices, including secondary memory devices and other terminals for communication. And finally, about system bus. So all of them, all these components lie in a common bus channel that is called as a system bus. which it is basically used to provide communication among the processors, main memory, and IO modules. The CPU and the device controller they basically use memory cycle for execution purpose, but it is only available to one device at a time. And talking about the bootstrap program, it is loaded when the user starts the computer, and it is used for initializing all the aspects, device aspects connected to the computer system. So after this is done, only the operating system loads in the computer system. And as a startup process, there is an init, which is the first process which is executed by operating system. In between, you have got the interrupts, which may be software or hardware interrupt. Based on that, the CPU executes the instruction. So let's see the execution process. First of all, whenever a system, there is an IO request. So there's a particular system called which triggers this particular IO request, and if that request can be satisfied, it is the controller is given to the kernel IO subsystem by using operating system routines. And if it's executed, it is going to transfer to the appropriate interrupt service routine, right? And it completes that particular code and returns back whenever time comes. So if that request is not could not be satisfied, so that request is sent to the device driver wherein that particular process is blocked, and there is a process request wherein it issues commands to the controller, and so that this particular request can be interrupted. And using device controller commands, the monitor device or the interrupt can perform when the IO is completed. So when the particular IO is completed, the trigger is sent to the device controller system, and a particular IO gets executed. And once again, if there's an interrupt, is going to the OS is going to handle the interrupt, receive the interrupt, and store the data in the device driver buffer. Using system calls, that particular interrupt handler is executed. And next is the device driver. It determines which IO is completed and indicates the state change to the IO subsystem. And finally, transfer the data when it is completed to the appropriate process that particular point. So let's see the common functions of interrupts. Usually, an interrupt is it can be either software and hardware, and it is used to send the signal to the CPU. So the software interrupt, as you know, it is also called as system calls. So when the interrupt is triggered, what does CPU do is it stops executing the instruction, and the control will be transferred to the fixed location, and this that location is called as the interrupt service routine, right? So the starting address is stored at the fixed location where the routine executes. So these interrupts do not alter the control flow of the process executing on the processor, but it just goes on to the appropriate location where it executes the interrupt service routine and comes back to the original point. And finally, the processor accesses the data from the main memory before executing any instruction. So this main memory is also called as RAM. And the interrupt architecture must save the address of this interrupted instruction. And there is another kind of interrupt called as a trap or exception. Usually, operating system is interrupt driven. Here you can just observe the interrupt timeline. When user process is being executed, the CPU is very busy executing the user process. Meanwhile, IO device can stay idle. So in between, the user process can request for an IO to be executed. So it starts transfer. In that time, the IO device goes for transferring the particular data for the user, and once it is done, it comes back, stays idle. So there is alternate switching between the CPU and IO devices. When user process is being executed in the CPU and it is not requesting for any IO device stays idle, and when it asks for IO device the IO device will be busy transferring the data. So let's discuss about IO structure. So every device, it has a device controller to connect it to the computer's address and the data bus. So devices can be classified as block oriented or character oriented, right? So device control, what is the responsibility is it is responsible for moving the data between the peripheral device that it controls and its local buffer storage. So all the devices are connected to each other by using common bus, and CPU and main memory is also connected with this bus. So what happens after IO starts? Control returns to the user program only after the IO completion, and after IO starts, control returns to the user program without waiting for IO completion. So there is a term. There are terms like system call and device status table, which is used to track the indexes into the IO device table, and these various types of controllers is will be used in computer system. So the main job of device control is it manages the data transfer between the peripheral devices and its controller. So the device driver is handled by the device controller. Let's discuss the steps that are followed in the IO operation. First of all, device driver will load the registers within the device controller. And next is device controller takes action according to the data loaded in the register. Then data will be transferred from device to its local buffer with the help of the device controller. And after completion of data transfer, the device controller sends an interrupt signal to the device driver. Then finally the control goes back to the operating system. So this is all the process of the IO operation. You can observe application from application program. There are many system calls, and there is a subcomponent called as input output control system, wherein the OS takes the input in terms of system calls and gives it to the IO device. And finally, there is an IO bus which handles this. And there is a controller for each one of the peripheral devices, and the device driver and device controller is also responsible for these IO operations. So let's talk about the storage structure. Processor accesses the data from main memory before executing any instruction, right? So the main memory, as you know, it's also called as random access memory or RAM, and DRAM also can be used in main memory. So at the top of the hierarchy, if you just recall the hierarchy of a storage device, the top will be having what is called as a CPU register, and you know it is faster, but it has got lower capacity. It is fast. The access is very fast in CPU registers compared to other lower levels of hierarchy. Next, the cache memory capacity. The next level we have got cache. So at the topmost we have got CPU registers. In the next level you'll be having a cache level 1, level 2. The next RAM, which is a physical memory, and finally we have got disk, that is magnetic disk. And next in the next level optical disk, and finally magnetic tape. So the fastest goes from top to bottom. The top hierarchy in the first level, we have got the very fast access CPU access, that is CPU register, but its capacity is very low. In the next level, you have got cache, where the cache memory capacity is less than 1 MB, and user program and data are stored in the next level, that is physical memory or main memory. Main memory is volatile, so it cannot be stored permanently. And again, storage system is again classified into temporary and permanent storage, right? So in the lower level, in the next lower level, you have got magnetic disk. So this is all about the hierarchy. And the disk surface, when we talk about the disk surface is divided into tracks and sectors wherein data is stored there. And disk controller determines the logical interaction between the device and the computer. That is, for each device, as you know, you have got a device controller, and device controller is responsible for moving the data between the peripheral device and the local buffer. So here, before talking about DMA or direct memory access, let's see how what made us to use DMA. So as you know, a software that communicates with device controller is called a device driver, and the device can be started by the device driver, and the application program can continue in operation in parallel with the device. So once the transfer of the data is complete, the device controller informs the device driver with the help of interrupt that it has completed the operation. And the final device driver then returns control to the operating system. So this form of interrupt driven IO is suitable for transferring small amounts of data. But for when we use large bulk of data, each time we are accessing the device controller, to and fro communication takes place for so large amount of data. It will be very bulky and too tiresome. So this problem is solved by direct memory access or DMA. So what happens in DMA is the device controller transfers the entire block of data directly to or from its own buffer storage to memory, so without any intervention from the CPU. So far, we had been using device driver and device controller was communicating, and it was informing the CPU, and once it is done, it control returns back once again. So that problem is solved in DMA. So what does the device controller do is it transfers the entire block of data directly to its own buffer storage, directly to or from its own buffer to the memory without intervention from the CPU. So here let's discuss about computer system architecture. So we have got different types of operating system ranging from single user, multi-user, multitasking, multi-threading, and multi-processing. Starting from single user, where there is a single user using a single system. Okay, single user, and where there is a single general purpose processor dedicated for that single user. And next, coming to multi-user, where it serves many users. And third is multitasking. Fourth is multi-threading, and finally we have got multi-processing. So coming to multi-processing systems, multi-processing. So here, multi-processing system means that more than one processor is in communication, in close communication. That means the processors share the common bus, clock, memory, and peripheral devices. So multi-processing system, they are also called parallel systems or tightly coupled systems. So to discuss about the basic features of these systems, that is, the processor should support efficient context switching operation, and it supports large physical address space and large virtual address space. That means if one processor fails, then other processors should be able to retrieve the interrupted process. So these multiprocessors can be they have got advantages, that is the number of processes can be increased. It means you can perform multiple tasks at the same time, so the throughput will be high. Next, about the cost, it is cheaper because since all of the processors they are sharing this common bus, clock, peripheral devices, it is cheaper. Talking about the cost, and next, reliability is it if one processor fails, then it has no effect in the entire system. That is, another processor can also take over the interrupted process. So these are the advantages of a multiprocessor system. Coming to the disadvantage that we talk is it is more complex in both hardware and software. So here we have got two types in multiprocessing system, that is asymmetric processing and symmetric processing. So in symmetric processing means by the term it means that they are based on the single bus. Symmetric processing, multiprocessing means the number of homogeneous processors are running independently without affecting other programs. Okay, the in symmetric multiprocessing, what happens is the number of processes, or we can say number of homogeneous processes, they are running independently without affecting other programs. So it's like all processor perform the kind of jobs or the task. Next, and here each processor uses different data and program, but they share some common resources like memory, I/O device, and so on. So in symmetric multiprocessing, all processors will be at the same level. They are working like peers. So coming to the second type of multiprocessing, that is asymmetric multiprocessing. So in asymmetric multiprocessing, it means that the CPUs are not equal, and the system resources may be divided in a number of ways. So that is, there will be a master and slave kind of uh, hierarchy. So a master processor will control the entire operation, gives instructions to the slave processor, and slave processor can perform the task. So each processor has the own task which is assigned by the master processor. So what when you comparing the differences between symmetric and asymmetric multiprocessor, symmetric multiprocessor treats all processors as equal, but it is not the case as in asymmetric multiprocessing. In symmetric multiprocessing, it is easier to implement rather than asymmetric multiprocessing. So the single OS will manage all the processor cores simultaneously in case of symmetric multiprocessing, whereas here it is treated as separate OS, and separate copy of the same OS manages each core. So in symmetric we do not have master slave, whereas in asymmetric we have got the concept of master slave uh, facility. So here you can observe there are three CPUs, and they have their own registers and cache. These processors will work at the same level, and there is no master slave relationship. So they share common resources like memory, I/O devices. So basically, they communicate with each other through the shared memory, and so it is easier to implement symmetric multiprocessing architecture. Comparing the symmetric versus asymmetric multiprocessing, you can observe that in symmetric they all share the same memory, whereas in asymmetric multiprocessing they act as different processors, and there is a concept of master slave, where master assigns the task and the slaves perform the jobs assigned by the master, and they work like different processors. And in symmetric, as you know, there's a single OS which manages all the CPU cores simultaneously, whereas in asymmetric it's treated like separate OS, and shared memory is not used in case of asymmetric multiprocessing. So next is about dual core design. So this kind of strategy tells the cores which are available in the system. So if there are if it is a four core system, we have got four processors running in a single entire computer system. And if there is an 8 core, we have got 8 processors running, or 8 cores with 8 processes running within the system. The next is about cluster system. These cluster systems, they gather multiple CPUs in order to perform the task. That is, these systems differ from parallel systems in a way that they are composed of two or more individual systems coupled together. So, in this kind of clustered system, they share the storage and they are closely linked using network. Basically, they are linked with the LAN cable. Clustering, why this kind of clustering is required is basically to provide high availability, right? So whenever one processor fails due to some reason, another processor can start up the same task. A layer of cluster software will be running on these cluster nodes, and each node can monitor one or the other through the LAN. That is, the all systems will be connected together via LAN, and if the monitored machine, so one node will be acting as a monitoring machine, and there will be others who will be monitored, right, by that monitoring machine. So if the monitored machine fails, the monitoring machine can take the ownership of its storage and once again restart the application. Here once again we have got two types, asymmetric and symmetric. In asymmetric, it is that is one machine will be in hot standby mode, while the others will be running the application. That is, one system will be basically in charge in monitoring and servicing of the other systems. So that is the meaning of hot standby mode, while the others will be perform the processing. And if any server fails, the hot standby mode can become the active server. That is, it can take over the task. Next, coming to symmetric mode, that is symmetric kind of clustering. Two or more hosts should be running the applications. Okay, and they will be monitoring each other. That is, each of them there will be several ecosystems or peers. All of them will be either processing or all of them may be monitoring. It's like that. And this mode is efficient because it uses all the available hardware, right? So some clusters they are used for high performance computing. And next is about the concept of distributed log manager. So why is this used? Basically, because most clusters they do not allow shared access to the data on the disk, right? Not allow shared access to the data on the disk. For this, distributed file systems must provide access control and locking to the files in order to ensure that no conflicting operations occur. So that if many processes try to access the data on the disk, some kind of access control mechanism and locking of certain files to the disk must be ensured. So this type of service which will be provided is commonly known as distributed log manager. The service software, that is distributed log manager, is responsible for handling the access control and any conflicts related to the files by the processes to the application. So here we'll be talking about operating system structure. First of all, it's the base early systems were developed in terms of batch kind of processing systems. So what is this batch actually? It is nothing but the collection of jobs which are bundled together and given to the operator for processing. So these jobs they are nothing but sequence of commands, programs, and data. So here you can observe when batch is processed, it has its own inputs, control commands, and data. That means what the data has to be fetched in, what will be the input, what should be the how should be the execution, okay, and some control commands in order to perform this processing of data. So all this is given to the operator. The jobs with the similar needs they will be batched together in order to speed up the processing. So the main function of this batch system is to service the jobs in a batch one by one without requiring any operator's intervention. So there will not be any human or user intervention when the job runs. And when you just look into the memory layout for batch system, it has got a resident area and transient area, wherein there will be a batch monitor which will implement batch processing system. So it is batch monitor is also called as a kernel. So kernel resides in one part of the main memory. So computer operator gives the command to start the processing of a batch. The kernel sets up the processing of the first batch. Job will be selected from job queue and loaded into main memory. So when the job completes, the memory is released and the output for the job is copied. So this is how the actually batch system works. When the job is completed, it returns control to the monitor in order to take the next job. Next, coming to the next kind of system, which is a multitasking system. So multitasking, or it is called as a time sharing. Multitasking means the process of performing multiple tasks at the same time. Multiple jobs will be completed at the same time parallelly. Multitasking means that the computer can work with more than one program at the same time. Usually, the response time will be less than 1 second, and each user has at least one program executing in the memory. For example, the user may be working with the database, simultaneously performing some screen analyzing data and working with Excel sheets. It looks like as if the computer is dedicated to him. So fast context switching happens. So it is multitasking is a logical extension of multi-programming, wherein it supports multiple programs to run concurrently. Say for example, if the process don't fit in memory, so a term called swapping is used, wherein what required process is required at that particular instant is brought into the main memory for execution, and there will also a part of virtual memory which will be used, which is the extension of physical memory. And when we talk about multitasking, and once again time sharing. So in time sharing, actually, there is a logical extension of multi-programming. So processes time will be shared among different users simultaneously. That means many users feel that the system is with them. So it is a method that allows multiple users to share the resources at the same time. So it is mainly designed to provide quick response, and also the processor time is shared between multiple users at a time. So there'll be something called as time quantum. As we may refer later, we have got some scheduling algorithms like Robin Round, wherein each there is a time slot availed for each particular user, and the context switching happens. Context switch happens so fast, so that it switches over each process, and then it is if any other process wants to continue the execution, they can continue back. Once the time elapses before the process completes servicing, then the kernel, what it does, it preempts the process and it moves it to the end of the queue. So main difference between multi-programming batch system and time sharing batch system is that in case of multi-programming, the objective is to maximize the processor use. Multiple programs maximize the processor use, whereas in time sharing, the objective is to minimize the response time. Minimize response time. Just look out the multi-program memory layout. So what was the drawback in batch system? In batch system, any process that would in any job that would go for execution, it maybe that job takes a very long time. Okay, the first job takes very long time. Only after that job completes, the next job can run, right? So much of time is wasted if it is a very long executing process, right? And most of the time CPU will remain idle in batch system. At any time, either the CPU or the IO device will be idle. So, what to do to keep CPU busy? That means we need to have more than one program or job to be loaded for execution. Just like this, you can see the layout. So, more than one job. That is here. As a sample, we have included 4 jobs in a finite while byte memory, and to keep the CPU busy, more than here 4 jobs at a time can be executed. So this main purpose of multi-programming is to increase the number of processes that are executing. Okay, it's to maximize the processor use basically, or to increase the CPU utilization. So here there will be the operating system divides the entire transient area to store multiple programs and provides resource management. So resource management is the main aim of multi-programming system. So OS keeps number of programs into memory and it selects one program from memory and executes. All the programs that enter into the system will be kept in a job pool. That is, job pool is a list of processes residing in the disk, and they'll be waiting to get the memory. And they uses some concept of job scheduling. So in this kind of multi-programmed system, the CPU utilization is high as well as it increases the degree of multi-programming. But the drawback is CPU scheduling is required. That means each time CPU intervention is required, and also memory management is required in order to manage all the processes to be executing to be kept in the main memory. So let's say that a particular instruction is being given, like for example division by zero. So this is also called as software kind of instruction, wherein there's a possibility of the errors, that is which may be triggered by an trap or system fault. So this kind of error is generated by the system by executing a special operation called system call. So what happens when a CPU is interrupted is it will stop doing whatever activities it was doing and jumps on to a fixed location, and that fixed location will have a particular starting address and where that routine is being addressed, and this routine executes and on completion it will return back to the same original point. So basically, to talk about the interrupts, so we have got two kinds of interrupt, that is hardware and software. So let's discuss about the OS operations. So in the previous slide you have seen about the concept of interrupts. For example, if there was no process to execute or no IO devices to service, and let's say there are no users to whom to respond, what will the operating system do is just sit quietly, wait for some event to happen. So these events, they are signaled by the occurrence of interrupt or trap. A trap is also called as an exception. Is it's the software generated interrupt caused by error or maybe invalid memory access. So this interrupt driven nature of the operating system, it defines the general structure. So for example, for each type of interrupt, it goes to separate segments of the code and then executes that, perform some action. And there is a routine called as interrupt service routine, who is responsible for dealing with that kind of interrupt. So since the OS and the users share the hardware and software resources, we need to make sure that an error in the user program should cause problems only for that program that is running. Say for example, if there are many users and multiple processes which are actually following that process where it causes an interrupt. So if an error in one program causes error in other programs, it will be havoc, right? So what should the operating system do is see that the erroneous program should take action only to that particular program where the actual service or interrupt service routine happens. So if in case of a multi-program system where one erroneous program might modify another program, then the data will be lost, right? So there must be protection provided by the OS to sort out these errors. So for that, the OS maintains a dual mode operation wherein some privileged mode is executed in the kernel mode, and other operations like modifying the programs and other data may be done in the user mode. So in this first mode, that is kernel mode or supervisor mode or privileged mode, there's a bit called as mode bit. Okay, in this mode bit, which is usually provided by the hardware, this mode bit is added to the hardware to indicate the current mode. Say for example, we indicate 0 by saying that it's in a kernel mode, and we indicate 1 by saying that it's in a user mode. So 0 indicates kernel, 1 represents user. So with this mode bit, it is easy to distinguish between the tasks. Maybe whether it's a privileged task or a user or task on behalf of the user. So when the computer is executing on behalf of the user application, the system will be in the user mode. So if the user requires some help of the kernel, it can switch back, can switch to transition mode and change the mode bit to 0 for executing the kernel services. So what does this dual mode provide? So this dual mode of operation provides with the means of protecting the OS from the errant users. So we can guarantee that the privileged instructions will be safe. The instruction to switch to the kernel mode is an example of privileged instruction. So other examples may be timer management or interrupt management. All these are handled by the kernel, right? So in that case, the mode bit is switched to 0. So here you can observe the timer will be set to interrupt the computer after some period of time. Say for example, user process is in execution, and in the middle of its execution, the user calls for a system for calls the help of the kernel. That means it invokes the appropriate system call, and where the interrupt is being handled, which is called as a trap, and the particular mode bit is set to 0 for kernel, and it's going to call the interrupt service routine, where executes the particular appropriate system call, and once again after finishes off its routine, it comes back to the user mode. For that, the switching over has to be done by the kernel from mode 0 to mode 1 for user process execution. So there is a particular time interval for which it gets switched off back to the user mode. So who keeps track of this timer or clock? The kernel, or it's basically the operating system which keeps track. So all these concept of timer management, interrupt management is done in the privileged mode. So here you can look into the layout wherein the instruction there is a CPU which holds the current instruction address, and the memory it holds certain parts of the program, and the address of the next instruction can be fetched from the program counter, which has been brought to the memory for execution when required. And there is a layout for data structures and program instructions, wherein you can have the programs are stacked up onto the queue, and there is also ready queue wherein all the jobs can be waiting, and there is a DMA and timer. So a timer is set to accomplish the system services, and actually a timer can be set to interrupt the computer for a specific period. So it may be fixed or it may be variable. So who sets this counter? It's the operating system who sets the counter. So every time the clock ticks, the counter will be decremented. So when the counter reaches to 0, an interrupt occurs. So before turning over the control to the user, the operating system ensures that the timer is set to the interrupt. If the interrupt occurs or if the timer interrupts, the control transfers to the operating system, which may be treated as an interrupt. So we can use this concept of timer to prevent user program from running too long. And the best way to do this is to initialize a counter with a specific amount of time to run. So let's see the migration of data A from disk to register. So as you know, main memory can be viewed as a kind of fast cache for secondary storage. And since the data in secondary storage must be copied into the main memory, data in secondary storage must be always copied into main memory in order for execution, right? And the data must be in main memory before being moved to the secondary storage. So we have this movement of information between levels of storage hierarchy, which can be either explicit or implicit depending upon the hardware design. In a hierarchical storage structure, the same data may appear in different levels. Like from magnetic disk, the same data A may be moved to main memory, and then once again it can be stored in cache for further use, and then moved on to the hardware register. So these are the several levels. Let's say integer A that is incremented by 1 is located in file B, and the file B resides on a disk block on which A resides to main memory. So this operation will be followed by copying A to the cache and then to the internal register. So the copy of A will be in several places like disk, it will be in disk, it will be in main memory, and it will be in cache, and then it will be in register. But the value of A differs in various storage systems based on their implementations, right? So, in multiprocessor environment, wherein it has got a concept of cache coherency, that is, where same data is being reflected in all other systems. This is called as cache coherence. Okay, it's usually a hardware problem, and such it is there. It must be provided in hardware such that all the CPUs have the most recent value. Whatever updations that each system do, it must be in consistency. Okay, and in case of a distributed system wherein situation becomes even more complex, right, where if you have got the same data everywhere and same copy of the data must be there in all the systems, that is usually difficult to maintain. So in such kind of systems there will be several copies of the same file which are kept in different computers that are distributed, and since the various replicas can be accessed and updated concurrently, so replica is updated in one place, all other replicas